I understand if we stretch our legs, it stretches our brains. So that's important. Agenda item, we turn it over to Brandon. Number 15, is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was going to talk about, so I hope we're on the same page.
All right.
And the beauty of this is you guys only have to listen to me for 2 more agenda items and then I'm off the hot seat for a while. So that's good news. Agenda item 15, the water development program priorities. We mentioned this earlier. This is kind of a response to how do we, or what's the best way to transfer money and compare priorities between account 1 and account 2. So what we have done is we already operate under a priority system for each of the accounts. And so if we want to compare the priorities from account 1 to account 2, if we can't fund everything, I've meshed those 2 priorities together. And that is under tab G in the notebook. And for this cut, what I did, or what we did, is we did not change the order of the priorities in each of their lists. So if you turn the page to the second page, those are the 2 priorities for account 1 and account 2. So when we mesh these together, we are not saying that one of these priorities is going to jump up over the other. So we're keeping this order together, but we're just combining the 2. And as we did this, I tried to keep in mind at least what I understood the program set up to be. And so development of new water kind of called out to be on top. And so that plays through, but really if you look at this spreadsheet, the project priority, the first column is new priority, the second column is a project priority, and then on the right is which account that relates to. So you will see 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 7. Those would be priority 2 in account 1, account 2. And so I just developed this so that we could compare and rank the projects, not only in their individual account, but also together. So going forward, if we follow this priority list, when we make a recommendation, we'll put 2 priorities on our recommendation. The first priority will be how it ranks out in its respective account. And then the second priority would be how does it rank out in the combined list. So I think this allows us a way to not have to change percentages in that discussion, but allows us to go down the list and say by priority, this one should get funded and this one shouldn't.
Good.
And I don't anticipate that this is going to take any action tomorrow. I just presented to you that this is kind of the mindset is when we start making recommendations, this is what will be used.
Mr. Chairman,
Mike?
basically you looked at the criteria when you developed these lists, statutes and criteria. Is that correct?
But it was the basis for my thought, yes.
Okay. So if we wanted to change these, we probably have to change statutes or criteria.
If we change the order, I believe it's mostly in criteria, and we could change the criteria. The other thought that I had in developing this list is right now we've got a lot of unknown, and historically this has not been an issue, and it's conjecture or just looking through a crystal ball that we think it will become an issue.
Mhm.
So this just gets us a starting point.
Sure.
The next step that I would envision, that if we do start realizing that this is going to be an issue that we need to address, then maybe we look at the overall list and reprioritize it to the desires. And that would mean flipping one over the other that I did not do on this list. I did run through an exercise of that, but I'm not ready to present that to you. That was a thought.
Okay. Mr. Chairman,
Mike,
I don't see like, and then probably because it wasn't in criteria, I don't see some of our satellite programs like small water research. You know better than I what kind of things we see. Groundwater grants. And I think that's okay, but just recognize that they're out there and they do require money from time to time. And if we ever get to the point where we have to look at, we got a bunch of applications and requests, we follow this. There's some other issues out there we're gonna have to address.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with that, that if this does become an issue, we're gonna have to, this just looks at level 1 and 2 projects, but we're gonna have to look at the whole program.
Yeah.
And I do anticipate that we'll be doing that, but if we make it through and people feel the program good enough to keep it as is, then I think we'll be okay for a while.
Mr. Chairman, one more.
Mike.
I was kind of confused by the previously approved subdivision improvements. I'm not real sure I know what that means.
Mr. Chairman, I believe what it means is that it's a subdivision. And I will remind you that I did not do the priority, so I'm
I
taking
know
a guess.
somebody that had some input years ago.
But I believe, at least my interpretation of what this would mean is if we're doing a project for a municipality and they say that we have this plan subdivision, it's platted, the only thing it needs is water or something. That would be this. And it gets into the eligibility question of, are we funding subdivisions or not? And so if it's pre-approved and it's ready, just waiting on water, I believe that's what we're talking about here.
I remember, Mr. Chairman, I do remember one of our problems that we felt for a while we were letting developers off the hook. So I think that probably, that concern was probably grounded in those words somehow. It was the fact that why didn't the developer do this? And then it didn't get done. And so they're coming to us. So, but anyway. Thanks.
And Mr. Chairman, that might be something that we have or we have to address in eligibility.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think we're much more sympathetic to a district that's been working, it's in place. It's got real life people sitting there and they need help versus, you know, they had plats, they had all that's approved. But
Those are developers.
Yeah. We're not to bail out developers. If they're good developers, they need to put it in.
In defense of the developers,
Yeah.
we put in systems. I'm stepping out of the chair for a minute. And then we want to raise the rates so we can improve our systems. And we have to go to the Public Service Commission. And it's a $10,000 bill to get an attorney, to get all the paperwork, then go be before. And then you hope to get $20 a month more. And you never make up the $10,000 that you paid the attorney. Okay, now I'll jump out of the chairman's seat. Back into
But Mr. Chairman, is that for public entities or
just private.
just private? Yeah.
Yep. All right. Sorry, I got sidetracked. Any other questions or comments about the priority list that has been put together? It's a good
Chairman?
start. Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, yeah, similar to Commissioner Purcell, I think it would be good at some point in time, even if we don't prioritize those there, to list all those other programs. The one that I'm not seeing on there is community wildfire protection projects. And I think the other ones were already mentioned, you know, University of Wyoming water research programs, groundwater exploration. But I think it would be important to at least, you know, maybe asterisk those at the bottom, but wouldn't community wildfire protection studies fall out someplace in this list now?
I need help with that one, Brandon.
I don't think so.
Mr. Chairman, I might ask Jody here, what did we got a level 2 feasibility watershed?
Mr. Chairman, those are, I was looking at this. I believe that was the new one that was added per the request of the Teton Conservation District. When we did the watershed study up there, the Upper Snake watershed study, they had some areas that wanted to be able to put in just some hydrants and things like that to be able to have fire protection there. So we added that as a something that they could come into our program for. But
It's not specifically listed, but it would have, had it been to be considered as a priority, it would have had to fit in one.
oh,
of these
if we did one
categories.
like what we did for Sheridan.
Yeah.
Oh, my apologies. I'm thinking of two different things here. Yes, they probably would have, yeah, come in under that.
And that would have been probably a level 2 feasibility study.
Yeah, I would, that's what I think we would qualify it as.
Senator Hicks, did that help you?
Yeah, well, it does, but it seems like we need to maybe, if that's the case, we maybe need to tease out some of that stuff too, is how does a level 2 feasibility for community wildfire protection rank out with a water supply shortage? So, yeah, but that does help if that's where it's at. I was just wondering, but I would concur with Commissioner Purcell at some time. It would be nice to all those other, maybe not sponsor driven programs, but agency add-ons or programs within the agency. Again, I think the groundwater protection and the University of Water Research is the ones that come to mind. And then the other question I have on this list, Brendan, is money becomes tight. It seems when we go through that priority list, one of the things that may help make a decision to move things up or down would be to also asterisk those that might have other areas of funding. So I'm looking at priority under the new priority 22 and 23, and I'm just wondering if those wouldn't be SRF programs, SLIB program for MRGs or some other more appropriate than water development. So it would be interested, you know, and I wouldn't spend a lot of time, but if we know that there's other areas that are funding those, to me, that even drops it to a lower level. But just a suggestion.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Question.
how we got into raw water supply. One of our great supporters in the legislature was John Marton. And John Marton was Speaker of the House. And he, in the worst way, wanted a raw water supply project, which were not in the criteria for his Buffalo golf course. So in came the Buffalo raw water project. And obviously I tried to say, gee, we don't really do that, but Martin said, well, yes, you do. So you do raw water projects now.
Wow. Okay.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just an observation, you got to get water to the buffaloes.
Maybe it's buffalo's grass.
We do. Any other comments, questions? Back to you, Brandon.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the next item on the agenda, item 16 is the WWDC project application fees. This was the topic of many discussions. And so we have done some evaluation and presented some alternatives. It wasn't my intent to have everything finalized today and to make a motion tomorrow, but present this for discussion and likely discuss further in upcoming meetings. But the material for this was a handout, and it is being presented on the screen. And I'll jump quickly to kind of the conclusions, but just explain that the current application fee is $1,000, and that is established in statute, up to $1,000. That is established in statute. And I also wanted to point out that the philosophy of the program has always been that planning studies are fully funded by the program to ensure that the reports are unbiased and performed in such a manner as to determine whether the state should invest in the project. And I do believe that's pretty close to the wording taken out of the criteria. Me personally, I do believe in that. I see studies where they're not bad studies, but they've got different objectives. And what we're looking at, we're looking at good investments of state dollars. And so I do value that philosophy for the program, and that kind of goes into some of the thinking as we move on. Also in the water development program criteria, and I'm on the third paragraph, Riley, of page 1. It allows for the commission to determine if the sponsor should be required to pay a portion of level 1 and level 2 study costs incurred to develop the recommended alternative needed to secure level 3 funding. So that'll play into some of my discussion on the conclusions. So what we did to analyze this is we started with the 10-year history of applications. And over that 10 years, there were 96 applications that were new to the program that requires an application fee. There were many more studies, but 96 of them required an application fee. So I just wanted to see what kind of revenue was generated by application fees. On average over the 10 years, so $9,600 per year. And then if you assume that the annual revenue that we get from severance tax is about 30.3 million across all the accounts, that equates to 0.32% of the program revenue is generated by our current application fees. Pretty insignificant. There was, okay, so then moving on, the average cost per study over that 10-year here period, and this is only looking at the ones that required a new application, is about $176,000 per study. So during the legislative session, there was an amendment added to the omnibus bill that suggested a 10% fee be charged to these planning studies. So that would have equated to about $17,000, the sponsor paying $17,000 of these studies. And so I ran through some math on that if that 10% were applied, it's estimated that we'd receive about $141,000 a year, which equates to 0.46% of our annual revenue. So again, that's still pretty insignificant. And the reason I ran those numbers is I wanted to truth it against the philosophy of if somebody's paying $17,000, they'll likely want a bigger say in how we conduct our studies. And right, wrong, or indifferent, I value the independent, unbiased So I just wanted to put that in there as that. We also looked at a tiered structure for application fees so that smaller districts proportional to larger ones. And we looked at what were the costs of the studies for a small, medium, or large. And we broke out the data that we had and looked at the averages. And really what we saw is in the table on page 2, that for irrigation districts, and there are 2 tables, one for irrigation or agricultural and the other is for drinking water. If you look at the average cost of the study, there's really not a whole lot of variability. If you look at the drinking water side, they increased some, about 11,000 to 30,000. And so there's a slight increase, but it's not significant that you can say you owe us 20,000, you owe us 3,000. The third thing that I looked at, I got on the old interweb and tried to determine that, so assuming that the application fee was established in 1980, what has inflation done to that $1,000? And the old interweb told me that the inflation over that period is about 235%. So $1,000 in 1980 would equate to about 3,350 today. So jumping to the conclusion on page 3. So increasing application fees $10,000 or 10% would be about $17,000 per study, but that jeopardizes the program philosophy. And then it still does not create a lot of revenue for the program. So what if that was the objective? It's still a small amount to the program. We prepared 3 alternatives for you guys to consider, and we can certainly look at more, but these were the 3 that came out after this analysis, and I'll just read them. One is request an amendment to the current statute to amend the application fee. And this requires legislative changes to the statute. The other option would be to change the current statute to give the commissioners the authority to determine the application fee. And then it could be revisited at your discretion to establish the appropriate application fee as you guys see fit. The third one is kind of a combination. It is to maintain the current application fee, not change statute, but then to use that clause in the operating criteria that you can require them to participate in the study. And we can amend the criteria to say something to the effect that X amount, that the sponsor is required to pay X amount of dollars to participate in the study. And this essentially does the same thing as an application fee. There's some things that we would have to work out as to when do we collect that. Would that be after a consultant selection, and would it get reverted if the project is deemed not, if the project does not get funded or something to that effect. So those are really the 3 options that I looked at, and then based on some of the numbers we ran and just kind of a gut feel, and I'm just throwing this out there for discussion, but 3,500, which is roughly 2% of the average study cost. It's very similar to the inflationary factor. Seems like a reasonable discussion point for starting the application fee discussion.
Any questions or comments on that?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one.
Let's get the legislature back on the,
There's always a difference between a sponsor that maybe cannot get funding or that within their own parameters, they elect not to use the study? Does it go for both ways? The $1,000, the way it is in here today. If an entity comes in, gives you the $1,000, you do the study, or we do, and they elect not to go forward with the next chapter, which is level 2 or into 3. Does that work whether they do or don't? Or do they get that money back if they do go ahead and proceed with the project at a later date?
So, Mr. Chairman, if I understand your question correctly, you're asking that if they make an application and then we do not do that study that they applied for, do they get their application fee back? Is that your question? Or
No.
are you asking if they do the study?
If the study was completed and they elected not to use it, they closed the book, because now they got the study, they couldn't afford to, maybe in their own internal way, couldn't afford to go to the next level, to build a project and create the debt that they would have. Do they get that $1,000 back? If they used it or whether they didn't use
If we do the study, they do not get the application fee back. If they apply and they don't get funding for their study, then they get up to 75% of their application fee back. We keep 25%.
it? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I know you're probably sick of my history lessons, but I'm gonna give you one anyway.
Let me get comfortable.
The application fee came about because we, in the late 80s, late 70s, we were getting consultants who would say, gee, I think you need a new pipeline. Why don't you let me fill out the application? And we'll see, we'll throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. So we were getting a lot of what you call nuisance applications. And the sponsors may or may not even have known, they go, all you gotta do is sign here, and they sign here, and then come the application. And so that's why we came up with an application fee at all, is to at least require the sponsor to write a check for $1,000, and it's not a big commitment, but at least by doing that, we knew they were aware of the project and supported it enough at least to give it $1,000. The amount, I think it was lower. We talked 500, we talked all sorts of things, but the real reality of it is we wanted the application to be totally affordable, because if they had money, we just assume they put that toward the loan for the project to be built. If you're dealing with small districts, and if they had some money, then they could take on the 33% loan, and it would help them with O&M, operate and maintain the facility. We didn't want to gouge anybody for an application fee, and so that's why we set on 1,000. But you give some of these numbers that Brandon talked about, one of the alternatives. Again, in the long run, that kind of money, should go toward the facilities, not to us. Whether it's their existing facilities or anything else. Now the 3,500, I don't care. It's up to you guys, but anyway, that's the history of why we ended up with an application fee at all, and our logic in setting it low for $1,000. It's it was just meant to make sure the sponsor was wanted to do the project and was willing to sign the application and give us $1,000, and it showed at least some commitment. Now, if that commitment's too low, I'll certainly be happy to address a slight increase in it. But you know, the 3,500, I don't know. And this is one of those issues that really needs vending by our sponsors. What do they think about it? I know that there were several sponsors that did not like the proposed legislation. But, and then I go back to the fact that I think is key, and Brandon mentioned it 2 or 3 times. These are our studies. That's why we have 4 of our representatives on the selection committee and only 1 sponsor. We are doing this to see if these projects are sound investments for state dollars. If they're not, we don't proceed for them to go on. Typically what happens is you do the study and the dollar signs in the sponsor's eyes decide they don't want to go on. But they don't know until at least they've done a reconnaissance level study to know how much ballpark it's going to cost. But so anyway, we didn't want price to be too high. Because if they did have that kind of resources, we'd like them to use it for a project or their own system. And B, we wanted to maintain control of the studies. And well, that's a history. And I certainly, I still believe it.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, just for a little further edification on the amendment that was put on the water bill, it actually went a little further than just increasing the 10%, because it did exactly what Director Purcell said. In fact, the reason there was the subsequent part of that was the 10%, but if the sponsor moved forward and ended up in a level 3, any of the money that they put towards the planning study was then rolled over towards their cost on the construction of the project. Again, the exact same philosophy is what we wanted to do, was encourage people that had a legitimate interest in having a study, with the idea that if the study showed fruition, that they would go to level 3 construction. That money then would be not money that was just put towards the program, and it would be money that was subtracted against their debt. So to provide those funds right back to that entity. So, and I don't know whether the 10% was right, but I think discussion, and I agree with the concept of you know, right now we take $1,000 and they don't get it. Maybe one of the alternatives we ought to look at is the $1,000 application fee. And then if they move forward, we credit that back to them as part of their 33% or whatever that ratio that the commission determines is appropriate for the sponsor share of the project. But the legislation actually contemplated doing that for the very reasons that Commissioner Purcell articulated.
Any other discussion or comments on the application fees?
I would just interject my opinion on one thing, that even if we do a study, even if they don't go forward with it, I still think it provides them a valuable tool that they can use for their planning. Whether they come to us for funding or they go fund it themselves, but it helps them. And I think especially of master plans, I think that's a very valuable tool for an entity that can't afford to go do it themselves. And then for them to start implementing however they see fit, well, maybe not necessarily see fit, but however they can fund it, even if they don't come back to us, I still believe that it's a valuable tool for them.
I agree as well. Any other comments? Okay. Brandon, we don't make a motion on it or anything tomorrow. It's just beginning of a discussion.
That's how I feel about it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay. No other comments. We'll move on to the next item. I see Greg Kerr on the video, and so that means we must be the University of Wyoming Water Research. Can you hear us, Greg?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh,
We think you're gonna ask for money.
We don't want to do.
Not asking for money today. Mr. Chairman, I'm Greg Kerr. I'm Director of the Office of Water Programs at the University of Wyoming. We administer the Water Research Program. I'm sequestered in my office, and I see my first slide up. Supposed to wear masks on campus. That's mandatory now. We have traveling restrictions, and I kind of feel like the football team. They just canceled my season, I guess. So, but I'm here. Wanted to visit with you about the Water Research Program a little bit today, and I will push the button for next slide, please. So the Water Research Program, I was also told to maybe speed up because of the timeline that's going on here, so I'm going to try to do that. We're a cooperative program, cooperative with the state of Wyoming through the Water Development Commission, the USGS, and the University of Wyoming. We have 3 interconnected goals in our program. One of those is the training of students in water, training of young individuals to move on and hopefully work in water in the state of Wyoming. We have an information transfer component. That means information from projects that we have through the University of Wyoming dealing with water, get out to whoever is able to use it, not only in the state of Wyoming, but anywhere in the country. And one of our main issues is dealing with water in the state and region of Wyoming, important issues to the state, so that we can be one step ahead, hopefully, than other states that sometimes want to sue us, or any other issues that come up in the state. Next slide, please. The student training, an important issue. I've told people this before. Probably every corner of this state that I travel to for meetings or talking with people, I run into people that young individuals working in the state of Wyoming, working in municipalities, city engineers, consulting firms, government agencies, both state and federal. But we have young individuals that were knowledgeable in water, being able to move out and stay in Wyoming and be able to be employed. Next slide, please. You can see from this, you don't have to read it, but we have approximately 16 to 17 students. I took a 5-year period here, but approximately 16 to 17 students supported through our program every year. Next slide, please. I might also note, going back to the other slide, we don't have to turn it back. Chris Larson, actually, his father should be proud. Chris Larson graduated with a master's from mechanical engineering and was supported through one of our water research program projects. So Dan Larson, you should be proud. Maybe you could update us sometime on where he's at now, but our information transfer. We currently have 58 projects. About 51 of those were completed and have final reports. Those projects, there are about 7 of those. Because of the COVID, we had 2 or 3 of them that have had extensions because of students not being able to come back on campus and faculty being off campus also. But those will be finished up and have reports on those also. And we have a few of those that are current that aren't due to be finished for another couple years. Water is very diverse. We've supported projects in 20 different departments. Next slide, please. Those projects, I don't expect you to read this, but from agriculture, animal science, civil engineering, different areas of engineering, law, physics, vet sciences, zoology. You can see the diverse areas that we've funded, departments and the expertise across campus that's dealt with our projects. Next slide, please. So what are some of the issues that we deal with? in projects? Well, first of all, we have water quality. Huge issue everywhere, water quality. That deals directly with produced water and the water quality with some of the produced waters that we look at. We go down to Wyoming water law. We've got projects funded looking at water law. Droughts in Wyoming, deal with droughts that we're currently in. Some of the irrigation efficiencies and consumptive use. Those are important issues that have been with us for years and continue to be used. Weather modification impacts and the stream flows. So important issues, our weather modification study for years. The university, we've had several projects looking at different aspects of the weather modification. Next slide, please. So our water quality, algal blooms. We've had studies in the past on algal blooms. We currently, if you recall, have just funded a project on algal blooms. Nitrates we've looked at in the past, some of the Jackson Hole area. E. coli, currently have a project that was funded looking at E. coli in streams and some of the major issues dealing with those. Livestock water, what type of quality water do we need for livestock? What type of produced water does it require to be able to use for livestock watering? And sediment, another big water quality issue. Looking at the Willwood project. We funded that project last year, so that's ongoing with various state agencies. I've listed some of the stakeholders that are involved in some of those projects, from DEQ to lawyers, the state attorney general's office, game and fish. We're all over the board. So many uses for this type of projects and data from these individual areas. Next slide. Produced water. We look at treatment. We've had several projects. Produced water was and still is a very hot issue in Wyoming. We looked at ponds, research on ponds. How do we make ponds efficient to meet regulations from DEQ? And how can we cut down on the number of ponds? We had a project that looked at reducing the number of ponds that the energy industries had to look at when they were drilling wells and pumping produced water. What type of compounds can be used to treat water? And mechanical means. We have projects dealing with how do you filter some of that water so that it can be put to beneficial use. And then we get into tracing, different monitoring methods for looking at water quality. Isotopes. A good example of projects dealing with isotopes was a project with Montana versus Wyoming. I have an article from a magazine and the heading was UW Water Study Helps Resolve Interstate Legal Battle. I don't know if any of you recall, we've gone over this one in years past, but Montana filed legal claim against Wyoming that some of its produced waters were contributing salt to the Powder River, and they filed a lawsuit. Well, we were working on one of our water research program projects, Carol Frost, looking at isotopes, which is in essence, radioisotopes provide a DNA of water. So they transferred over and started taking samples in the Powder River in both Wyoming and Montana. The end result was they found that the water that was being produced in Montana was runoff from Montana areas itself, not the same water from produced water in Wyoming. That legal claim was thrown out by the judge. So it was claimed that this project with Carol Frost saved the state maybe millions of dollars in years in litigation. So different entities that deal with all of these types of treatment and produced waters I had listed here below. Next slide, please. Wyoming water law. Treatise on Wyoming water law by Dr. McDonald. I think Senator Hicks is familiar with that. A couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, had a workshop up in Pinedale where Mr. McDonald went over his treatise. Our former state engineer said that this was one of the most important summaries on Wyoming water law, and he wanted to use it as a training tool for the state engineer's office employees. Mr. McDonald also looked at in-stream flow arrangements. The Attorney General uses water, some of our projects. Lawsuit between Montana and Wyoming. The Attorney General at the time, Pete Michaels, talked to me and thanked me for the projects that we had and the data from past projects on produced water and wells up around the Tongue River. He said that information was crucial in them providing proof that the water being pumped from those wells was not interacting with the Tongue River. And he said it helped him immensely in their litigation. Next slide, please. So droughts, we talk about climate variability, or the bad word, climate change. We've had projects looked at tree ring analysis and lake sediment analysis of droughts in the past and how they relate to what we're doing now with drought. I could just briefly say, in the different water years listed on the bottom and the stream flows back in the 1500, there were droughts that were much more extreme than what we're having now and lasted for 100 years or longer. On this graph, you can also see in the 1900 area where we had a wet period. Well, that happens to be the period that the Colorado River Compact was being developed, I think 1922. So you can see the wet period, but the droughts before and after that. So I think we all know the complications that we're using that short period of time in the Colorado River Compact. Next slide, please. So irrigation efficiencies and consumptive use, as I mentioned previously, an important component of consumptive use that's been used for years. Projects that have developed evapotranspiration, years of lysimeter data, being able to calculate consumptive use. Steve Wolf works with that very closely, probably every day, consumptive use for interstate compacts. I was going to have Steve come up and tell you how he uses it, but due to time constraints, I'll just look at this as the consumptive use, how important it is to the state, especially the state engineer, in looking at the interstate compacts, providing that information. Irrigation requirements. We look at different irrigation requirements for water transfers. We look at not only that, but irrigation scheduling. So many uses for the data that are produced from our projects. Next slide, please. Weather modification impacts. Barry Lawrence probably deals with that over the years closer than anyone, but I won't have him talk either due to time constraints, but just looking at, we've had water research programs supported ancillary projects through atmospheric science and other departments on campus. They added to our knowledge base for cloud seeding, the weather modification. We've looked at cloud physics, the effects of seeding over different terrain, when to seed, where to seed for the maximum benefit, looking at more accurate measurements of precipitation, trying to get that knowledge base. You know, things change, regulations change, science changes, and atmospheric science, Bart Gertz has done a terrific job and is now known both nationally and internationally as coming up with some of the best information on cloud seeding that's available. They use the Wyoming King Air. That's a highly scientific research plane for radar, LIDAR, and other technical information measurements. And very important information that's lasted for years. So these are some of the uses, different agencies that look at projects that we have. Our website is listed here. That site, I've sent that out previously, has all of our 58 projects, has all of the completed project reports, and it has all the abstracts for our current projects and other information on our program. I don't know if I went fast enough, but I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Anybody have questions for Greg? Comments? Hearing none. Thanks, Greg. Glad you're doing good things.
Mr. Chairman,
you.
I had one question for Greg, if we got a second.
Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Greg, when you showed this slide of the number of students that had worked in the program, I'm assuming were those graduate students? And do we know how many of those, if they were graduate students or if they weren't, how many of those were Wyoming resident students?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, those are a combination of all students. So when I put up the student chart, for instance, in 2015, there was approximately 19 students supported in that year. It depends on the projects, but this is from PhD students all the way down to undergraduate students. We do have figures on mostly graduate students that are participating in the program, but we do have breakdowns in our reports of the level that students are in school.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the second part of that question, do we know how many of these students were Wyoming residents?
No, I do not have that data. The individual PIs on the projects might have that, but considerable number of them are Wyoming graduates. And fortunately, we're able to keep a lot of those in Wyoming. Not all, but we are able to keep many of them in Wyoming.
Yeah, so again, follow up, Wyoming graduates, which means graduated from the University of Wyoming or graduated from high school in Wyoming so that they're Wyoming residents.
Again, I don't have that information, so I can't tell you how many we have.
Thanks. Any more questions?
I got a question for him.
Clinton?
Greg, with your consumptive use, what's the difference between flood irrigating and sprinkler systems?
Mr. Chairman, whoa, that opens up a big can of worms. I mean, as far as the difference, it depends on if you're looking at difference in return flow from flood irrigation. We've had many studies that look at return flows. And actually, the exact topic you're talking about in certain areas of the state where we've switched from flood irrigation to sprinkler irrigation and what the effects are in that particular area of that. But that would have to go back to a specific study.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Okay,
Only consume so much water.
Brandon, that appears to be all on your agenda.
Fix the runoff.
Yes, I will step down and turn the seat over to the next person.
So Senator Hicks, do you now take the seat and lead this next discussion?
No,
Chairman is,
Dan?
where's Dan?
That's the vice chair.
Oh, there he is, upper right.
no, Dan, if you want to go ahead, I'm not as adept at the technology as my vice chair, but with that, I can go on there. So the next topic for discussion for select water was distribution of employees on North Platte issues. And with that, I think we have State Engineer Greg Lanning with us. So Greg, I can't tell if you're up to the table or not, but if you want to, go ahead and jump in and walk us through the memo that you provided.
Well, thank you, Chairman Hicks. I'm this small dot. I see where that does look like I'm a mile away, but I'm up here with the next three topics in some form or another. And I'll describe each of the three of them just briefly as to the teams we have to address them. And then I'll move on specifically to the North Platte Issues and Distribution Employees. I'm Greg Lanning, the state engineer. I've been before this commission and this committee before, working on 8 or 9 months in the seat, having replaced Pat Terrell. The distribution of employees will be myself. This was a topic that came up after I first got here. We had a joint appropriations meeting that I testified at in January, I believe. And I remember hearing it, of course, I was new also, but hearing it for the first time there. And it's since come back for a little more detail as to what that looks like. In addition to myself, and I'll have a report out on this topic, I've got our Platte River coordinator with me, Jeff Cowley, as well as hopefully online. I'm not sure if I'm seeing the names, but hopefully a lot of our board will have joined us also, our superintendents for the Board of Control, specifically Superintendent Pugsley, who is in Division 1 and can help me with this topic if I need help as well. And then certain members of Select Water themselves and or our resident historian, Commissioner Purcell, can offer some background also, having lived through some of the issues related to the decree as well as the PRIP, the Platte River Recovery Implementation Program. The orphan water rights will just again, I'll briefly discuss who's going to lead that discussion. It was just to describe and give you an idea of what orphan water rights means. I'm going to give you one example. I know there's many more, but you can envision a subdivision from an urbanized area developing out over what was formerly irrigated country and may have had an irrigation company providing water to it. And so you'll probably understand that there's probably very historic water that goes with that. Once the development occurs over the top of it, what happens to that water? And this is a topic that I understand has been discussed at length in the past. It was brought up a couple of times in our Board of Control meetings as a good one to discuss through interim topics. That's why it's here today before you. When there are circumstances when we can't find a place for those very historic water rights, and they may be lost to abandonment, for instance. And so we've worked on, our team has, and leading that discussion will be Superintendent Lawrence Smith. And again, hopefully he's up and on the line and can help us with that, lead that discussion. We also, again, have members of Select Water that have interest and probably could comment on it, as well as our attorney, Chris Brown, is there to help us with that discussion. And then the hydrologically connected surface and groundwater, that was an effort driven by LSO in particular, and I would expect Abigail will report out on that, and along with Chairman Hicks. The distribution of employees assigned to North Platte Issues is a tab. J, it is. In that, I won't necessarily spend a lot of time on it, but certainly open it up to entertain questions and dialogue. There's 2 maps in there. You know, on face value, say distribution of employees in that North Platte Basin. You'll find 2 varieties. Our hydrographer commissioners who have been working that country for over 100 years, not necessarily the existing employees, but that's been the charge of how we regulate water in that area. So you'll find those historic positions, but also perhaps in the more recent development around 2002 with the decree, and then later with the PRIP itself, we had additional duties requiring reporting. And those are our North Platte employees. That's the second map. And so that is the overall description. And so hopefully those will be easily, through a display, and they are districts by hydrographer, And then acreage inspectors, which has to do with the PRIP and the decree itself. Also, I provided, so you could read in advance perhaps, some narrative to that for both of those. That narrative, by the way, is a direct copy out of our budget document. We didn't invent that. You'll see some red line additions or edits. And maybe back in the joint appropriations, that was a little confusing. We'd reported, we kind of double accounted those in those narratives. Whereas we have 15 employees total in the hydrographer commissioner world. And we have 6.5 employees in the acreage inspector or the North Platte employee world. Originally, or you could see, and even in our existing budget document where we have 20 folks accounted for accidentally in Division 1, and then you can go on later and in our account 1400, which is our North Platte employees, and then find a duplicate of those employees, some of those 6.5 employees. That has been corrected by red line, and that's what that stands for. Again, starting from the hydrographer commissioners, they have statutory requirements, both for water rights administration, but they also help report up and prove out water rights for later for adjudication, amongst many other responsibilities. The hydrographer commissioners themselves, as well as the superintendent, they're appointed each by the governor. They also review petitions, changes, or amendments to already adjudicated rights. The North Platte employees, there's 6.5 of those, 3 acreage inspectors. There's an area we call the triangle area. It's specifically defined in the decree as well as the PRIP. And it's, even though it's called a triangle, it's not necessarily a triangle. It's down there downstream closer to the Nebraska border. It had special conditions related to well inspection as well as trib inspection in that area. We have 1 employee each for those. And then we have our North Platte decree coordinator, Jeff Calley, who's in the audience with me. So those are the part-time in the chart there, the part-time Cheyenne office board of control position. That's evolved over time. That was a position specifically for, as we entered into this, to look into issues related to adjudication. So that's why it ended up in the Cheyenne office, to kind of work those details. A lot of that work has been completed, and that person still stays busy, but not necessarily specific to that initial mission. These North Platte acreage inspectors then do, you know, what the term implies. On the map there, you'll see that they were trying to evenly divide out 160,000 acres total that they would be, that's not necessarily the actual acreage, but the idea between the 3 inspectors was to divide up an equal amount of acreage for inspection every year.
Greg, can I ask you a question on that?
Yes.
So my question is, so the decree's been in place since 2002. I don't know when we got the first report on the number of acres, but at least in this part of the world, it doesn't change from year to year. And so why do we still have 3 people? And I can't speak for Southeast Wyoming, but I certainly know in the upper North Platte that the number of irrigated acres hasn't changed. The number of acres actually being irrigated, I mean, there has been no more new filings, so the number of adjudicated acres hasn't changed from an irrigation standpoint. Very rarely, unless in the case of extreme drought, and then we're talking minutia numbers that may not get irrigated, and that's strictly hydrologically. So what are these guys doing every year? Because at least I know in the upper North Platte, the number of acres irrigated just doesn't change year to year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a very good question, and maybe this is the heart of the topic as well. I should also clarify, back in 2002, they anticipated as many as 10 employees for this particular task, which is now 6.5, say 6 employees doing that type of work. And so it is less than what was originally anticipated, and then plus I must say, as a result of COVID and budget reductions, we're also looking at this topic as to the exact need and efficiency of these employees. So this will kind of go into a level of service or a workload. But specifically, the question was, what's the variability? Do the acreage, does it change or not? And in the upper area, I have a graph here. It's a little, and I can forward this to you, but it's an average, or it's the actual acreage inspected over a period of 10 years. And it may vary in the Saratoga area from 100,000 acres to 80,000 acres of intentionally irrigated acres. And I think what that gets to is actual water that is diverted. For instance, we may have wet years where they're not intentionally irrigated, but they may be variable. And then there's dry years where you can really see, that particular change in acreage, but also that leads then to consumptive use. What is the actual uptake of the water as well? So that's part of the question. There is some variability. There's more, as you mentioned, in southeast Wyoming. Real quickly, if I can find it, just to give you a little bit again of that standard deviation in the North Platte area. And these are North Platte River, so it's a total anywhere from over 200,000 on the high side to less than 170,000 acres. So there is variability year to year as well. And I'm glad the coordinator's joined me because he's probably finding some detail. He's been in the program a lot longer than I've been employed with the state engineer's office. Jeff, are you anxious to add to that, or?
Well, the decree, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hicks, just to add a little bit, the decree requires that we inspect those acres every year. And they do change, as you just mentioned off of that graph there. They round numbers from, we have a cap of 226,000 acres that we can intentionally irrigate in the Platte each year. Some years, the number, in dry years, the acres are very low, in 150,000. Some years, I think our highest was 207,000 acres. So they do change fairly drastically every year. And those changes, as an entire state, don't seem that big, but we then take those irrigated acres and put it into the consumptive use method because we also have a consumptive use cap under the decree. So if we didn't inspect those acres and we took a guess every year, we would then be taking a guess at our consumptive use, and the decree doesn't really allow for too much guessing on that. We need to be pretty precise because we do have both of those caps to stay under.
Mr. Chairman, go ahead. Did that answer your question?
Well, it actually raises more questions. How many years have we been doing this? And again, the variation from year to year is hydrologically driven. So when you don't got any water, you don't irrigate with it. And I think that's why you see that fluctuation from year to year. I would think after 18 years that we could start looking at that data and coming up and saying, look, if we've got an 80% supply on storage and we're at 60% snowpack, we got a pretty good idea based on historical data that we're only going to irrigate X number of acres. Instead of having a guy driving around in a pickup and checking off the same thing he did in 2002 and 2012 and 2018 wasn't irrigated because there wasn't any water and those were severe drought years. I would like to see us start to see if we can't put together some models based on the data set that we have to be able to provide some of that guidance. I just looking at efficiency of employees. Is that a possibility that we could actually start to use some of that data in a predictive model I guess to get back to the consumptive use, the biggest variation in consumptive use is probably going to be cropping patterns in eastern Wyoming drives that as much as irrigated acres. But is it possible to start looking at that data and start to develop some type of model that helps us be more efficient on? And here's where I'm going with this, because the discussion that I had with Greg back in December at the Joint Appropriations Committee is you know, these inspectors also share an office with the hydrographers. In some cases, it seems to me like there may be an opportunity to combine some of the workload, because on a good wet year or even a good dry year, whichever you want to choose, it seems to me like there's more work for the hydrographers than there would be the compliance or the acreage inspectors. And so that's where I'm trying to look at how do we increase the efficiencies across both the decree employees and those in the Board of Control, and see if there's some combined workloads that we can do there. But so the first question is there an ability to take the data and then summarize that and know when you're going to have a heavy workload and not, and then adjust that accordingly?
Very good. Yes, I see two questions there, and I'll, one is the second one, which I'll address second, is the overlap perhaps between hydrographer commissioners and the acreage inspectors. But the first was the model, and this is interesting because even since I've been here, y'all might know that the former state engineer, Jeff Fassett, was my counterpart when I first got here in Nebraska. And so he'd spent time definitely in this arena and then was in Nebraska. And then ironically, on the day I started, November 25th, I got a letter from him that says, hey, what about that data? You know, and in other words, he wanted us to up our game. And then he was pointing also at the model. And so we know now, you know, when we developed, you know, our acreage inspection and our consumptive use model, it's kind of the mother of all Excel spreadsheets. It's very cumbersome and difficult, and this speaks to, is there a model update, Mr. Co-Chair? And that was exactly what that letter was pointed at, and that's exactly what I've been working on since. And the answer to that is yes. And as you can imagine, this takes relationship between the two states in particular, but all the partners in the decree, not just Nebraska and Wyoming, but those are the major players. And so to be able to do that, you're going to have to, you know, develop trust. I mean, this is the former state engineer asking us this. And I remember talking to him, I says, just what are you after? Also, ironically, by the way, on the very last day before he resigned from Nebraska, he wrote me the next letter. It says, hey, what you've given me in the period between November and February isn't enough. Up your game some more. This is the last day before he left. He handed me this letter. So we've been working on that. I guess the point is it can be a very tenuous relationship, and thank goodness it's a good relationship. And part of that's because we have these employees out there doing their job on this data. The alternative isn't a good one, and I know you don't like us talking about that, but if we had to reopen the decree and for some reason have the court decide any of these issues, it would be difficult and expensive and time consuming. So key to all of this is the model. We think there's a better model, more efficient out there that perhaps could do that. Instead of having every year as required in the Brown Book, in the decree, wouldn't it be nice if we had a 10-year running average, for instance? Wouldn't it be nice to better define if we exceeded this cap? Wouldn't it be nice to define what that cushion is every year between that cap? And so all of these are on the table, and we are looking for these types of efficiencies. I see Superintendent Pugsley's face out there. I appreciate that. The second question, and I don't know if I have to address this too much, is that hydrographers really have a different role. They certainly stay busy, and especially this year, hot and dry, right? Hydrographers are out there visiting head gates and making sure water is going in the right places. Some stops, 50 stops a week, for instance. So they really don't, during the exact same time in season that we need to be inspecting these acres. And so it's very difficult. Even though it appears, that they're walking over the same ground, perhaps they're not. I believe that they have different and succinct responsibilities. Before I go any further, I'd like to hand it over to the historian if you've got any more comments, Commissioner Purcell, on did I miss on any of those initial, especially when you anticipated 10 employees, the idea of the model and the data reporting?
Mr. Chairman, no, I do recall the original budget was for 10 employees. But, I think just a brief history. Wyoming and Nebraska have had a long history of, they just didn't trust each other over the years in particular. And that's kind of documented by the fact that we have a decree in the North Platte rather than a compact. A decree is the parties can't agree to an arrangement, so they go to the Supreme Court of the United States. So that process started in the 30s and ended with the 1945 decree. And in that decree, Mr. Chairman, there were in fact acreage caps there as well. There was 2 different areas, above Pathfinder and from Pathfinder to Oron, tributaries. And what you'll see over the years is in good years, those people on uncontrolled streams, natural flow streams totally, there are years where they just don't irrigate. But in good years, they're out there working their fanny off, irrigating. The other point is, if they irrigate once, that counts. The other issue that happened to make this more complex is during the 45 decree, groundwater irrigation, hydrologically, we looked down at the hydrologically connected groundwater didn't count. We didn't count it. If you were an acre with wells that were sucking water indirectly out of the river, it wasn't counted as acreage in our reporting. The court saw through that very quickly. We actually went for a summary judgment to the special master saying groundwater isn't in the decree, nor should it be. So what are you going to do about it? And he laughingly rejected our summary judgment motion by saying times have changed. There is a connection between groundwater and surface water, and Wyoming needs to consider that in their reporting. So that's made this a little more complex as well. But the reality of it is, in the settlement, we have protected our way of operating in the North Platte through that and the PRIP. We can keep doing what we've been doing. And a lot of that is just because our reporting through the NPDC has kept peace in the valley, both with Nebraska and the Fish and Wildlife Service. I would hope someday we can come up with a technology that would simplify it. But I got to tell you that anything we did to simplify it, any other modeling or other methods than feet on the ground, would have to be approved by the NPDC, which is represented by Nebraska, Wyoming, the Bureau, and Colorado as well. So we're just not out there on an island on this. We are in the business of documenting to Nebraska and the other water users that we're not the water thieves that they think we are. And that in and by itself has
Maybe we are.
kept peace in the valley. We can actually get in the same room with Nebraska, and it's very amicable. In the old days, nobody talked. Mr. Pugley's predecessor and his partner on the other side of the state line would meet at the state line and yell at each other every once in a while, and that was about it. So, but with the NPDC, we do have new communication. Rightfully or wrongfully, I think rightfully, we did agree to more reporting. The onus in all these issues obviously falls on the upstream state to assure that they're not stealing water that's entitled, should be going to the downstream state. And, you know, this is such important work right now. To get it accomplished with 6.5 employees, I think is a yeoman's effort. They work hard and they meet all the deadlines and get all the reports out. And it's going very well. Now, I would hope that somebody is in fact within the committee, the North Platte Decree Committee, at least looking at ways to perhaps streamline the process and reduce our costs without a effect on accuracy. But nonetheless, that's my history lesson on that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Commissioner Purcell. I'll turn it back to Co-Chair Hicks just in a minute, but also as a just one last note, as we head into the effects of COVID, as you all know, had profound effects on state revenues in particular. And then here in agencies, we've been through 3 phases of budget reductions. 1, to reduce existing budgets. 2, look at 10% budget reductions. And then phase 3, another 10% budget reductions. These North Platte employees are all in the general fund. The general fund's the target for the main part, or the most part. And so we're looking also at these employees and these efficiencies for that purpose also. The Board of Control employees, the hydrographer commissioners, in those 15 employees, as you all know, are funded out of Water Development Fund number 1. And that's been for 2 or 3 years now. And so there's a kind of a fund differential, if you will, but those North Platte employees are in the general fund, and we're forced to take a look at those efficiencies from that angle as well.
I saw Brian Pugsley had his hand up. Brian, you still want to add something there?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I gotta learn how to run this thing. I apologize. But in answer to Co-Chair Hicks's question, second question in regards to maybe the efficiencies of allowing some of these compliance people to be able to do some of the work that hydrographers do. In some cases, we do have that going on right now. Although most of the hydrographers, or I'm sorry, the acreage inspectors are not appointed by the governor, so they are not appointed to any specific district. So technically, we take it that they can't touch a head gate because they are not appointed by the governor to regulate water. Although we do have them out making measurements, doing safety of dams inspections, taking proofs to an extent, things of this nature. If they're in the area, we try to get those guys to pick up some of that slack for some of those hydrographers that may not be in that particular area that these acreage inspectors happen to be into. So it is happening to an extent.
All right, back to you, Greg.
Thank you, Chairman Hicks. That's the end of my presentation. I've got additional details if needed, you know, in terms of acres and those kinds of things. But having heard your clarifications related to your thoughts on the North Platte employees and the distribution, I think we've covered that topic.
All right, I've got a request from our LSO staff to take a 10-minute break here. So right now I'm gonna go on a break for 10 minutes. I don't know what your clock says. Mine says about 2 or 3 minutes till 3 o'clock. So we will reconvene at about 10 minutes after 3. So if you want to turn your speakers and your video off, please.
It's not cast skin, but.
Yeah.
But anyway, they said, do you weld and do you do metal and grind stuff? They said before we put you in that tube, we have to x-ray your eyes to make sure you haven't got steel in there. Because the magnet in that thing will.
I don't see Chairman Hicks.
The chair's better back.
But I think we can go ahead and get going. I'll take the chair until
So
he gets
there he
back.
takes us to lunch.
Can you hear us in the main room? Oh, there's Chairman Hicks. Go ahead, Chairman Hicks.
We were going the right way. But we were taking.
I can, we have Co-Chair Larson ready to start us up again.
All right, we're back on the agenda. We are now reconvened for the Select Water Committee. Next item on the agenda is orphan water rights, number 19. Take it away, Greg.
Thank you, Co-Chair Hicks. You already heard my brief description of this and a description also of the team that's gonna walk us through your handout. It's tab K in your workbook. And I see keep calm cowboys on the screen here. That's our lead. There he is. Superintendent Lawrence Smith. Would you please take us into this? And then if you can't tell or see, we also have Attorney Chris Brown with us here in Cheyenne.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Lanning. Since our last meeting in June, the Board of Control and State Engineer have done quite a bit of research and work on this issue of orphaned water rights, or more simply, water rights, which for some reason are no longer diverting water or being used as they were permitted and adjudicated. So as we discussed in early June, many of these rights are within or near municipalities, and they are often some of the earlier priority rights on those specific drainages. We've reviewed all the statutes, the rules, and our policies, and we look to identify where the problems really stem from and what the issues are with these orphan water rights and how they are handled through the general scheme of water administration on a daily basis out in the field. We first then broke those down into a kind of three smaller problems. How can we address what has already occurred? How can we prevent future water rights from becoming part of this population of orphan rights? And then how can we make that petition process simpler for those people that are having to deal with the orphan rights kind of on the periphery or that may be involved in a petition submitted for something totally different. So we broke it up and we did this keeping in mind that everything we do must occur and maintain and protect the primary tenets of our water law system. What we have provided you in the packets are three sets of statutory changes that we believe go quite a ways in solving a couple of these issues. First off, we took a look at the future and how can we prevent any of these things from happening again, or try to limit that exposure of how many water rights are ending up hanging out there and not being used like this anymore. And this typically happens with subdivision development. So we looked at Title 18, which is county governments, county subdivisions dealing with the rural subdivisions and in nature. And there have been many instances over the years since that statute was adopted I think it was in 2000 that that statute was adopted in the form it is now. And counties have allowed subdivisions to be approved before their formal completion of any of the requirements in that statute. On our side, what happens is, because of the language in the statutes, the developer will submit the paperwork and petition to take care of these issues, but then the county approves it and then they stop doing anything with the petitions. And it becomes a an issue with, we just can't go with them anymore. The petitions either die or languish and we have to dismiss them, or oftentimes they're even withdrawn by the petitioner. So we laid out in Title 18 a little beefier language in that section. If you look at your document 21 LSO 0062 and starting on page 5 of that document, you'll see the changes that we've proposed to go into Title 18 5-306 and 316. And that's all intended to close up those loopholes. And so it will force the developers to actually comply with the statute, and the counties too, for that matter. Some counties are really good. Other counties really don't want us involved. But we found that this is important enough, and it really works when the counties approve these things after the petitions have been through and the water distribution plans have been approved, that it works well. And we get the information on the plats for those subdivisions that's necessary. So we like it so much that we'd like to also have that included the same exact language in Title 15, which deals with specifically municipal type subdivisions. Right now, Title 15, Chapter 1 is really vague on what needs, and it's a real short statute with what needs to be included in a municipal type subdivision plat. We propose to just take the same exact language out of the Title 18 statute after the modifications and insert that into the Title 15 so that the municipal statute and the county statutes are exactly the same in what requirements we are asking for. And we believe that doing so, we can alleviate a lot of the future problems of these rights coming about, and languishing out there and essentially hurting the state down the road. And then finally, what we also did to address the petitioners that are having to deal with the burdensome requirements of notice on a petition for like a change in point of diversion or a change from one headgate to another diversion on a stream system. If one of these orphan rights happens to be intervener in that petition process and needs to be addressed through the process as a affected party, then that notice right now has to go out certified mail. And oftentimes we'll see where these orphan rights are in a municipality, you can have 200, 300, 400 individual lot owners in that municipality that need to be notified by certified mail. And it generally takes 2 of these mailings to get to a hearing. So the cost at almost $7 each for these certified mailings can add up quickly. And so to lessen that burden on the petitioners and ease that, we have proposed some changes to 41-3-114, which would allow the petitioner an option to utilize legal advertisement in the newspaper in that area to change or to notify those individuals that hold those orphan rights. Oftentimes, these people don't even know they have a water right. It hasn't been used for many years. And these certified letters come as a surprise to them. We find that, this tends to draw out the petition process when we have to do the certified mailings, and that adds to costs and makes it a less efficient system over time. And we believe that by going the route of legal advertisement, we can expedite that process a little bit as well. So the petitioners win in the end. So what we're trying to do through these changes that we're presenting you today is tackling the future problems in the development statutes and the current problems faced by water users in dealing with the constant problems that hinder petitioners when addressing these orphan rights. What we're still working on, if you'll recall, part of our discussion was how can we address those orphan rights that are still there? And we struggled with this significantly. We gave it a lot of thought, a lot of time, and we've tried some different amendments to different statutes to see what would fit, but we run into roadblocks that would upset the basic foundation of our water law system with regards to the measure of beneficial use of water. that seems to be our biggest hangup right now. It's our hope that the proposed changes before you will stimulate some further discussions and ideas from the stakeholders across the state as we continue to explore a solution which is palatable and legal, and while being economically efficient, for the appropriators involved. And we still have to maintain that integrity of the water rights system and the prior appropriation doctrine. I would stand for any questions.
Committee, any questions?
Mr. Chairman. This is Dan or Larson. I have a question on the first one, proposal number 62. Is there any penalties if it isn't done to the subdivider?
No, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson.
Go ahead.
We believe that, the counties are pretty much doing as they wish, and that's where our problem lies. Mr. Larson, you land right in the middle of Park County, and I think they're one of our bigger problems with this issue. They do approve these subdivisions quite often without finalizing the product.
So, Mr. Chairman, so are we going to get a big feedback or a big fight from the county commissioners, you think, or have you heard anything from them or the cities?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Larson, I have broached the subject with the chairman from Fremont County, and it has been fairly well received. They understand the problem. Like I said, we're going to see 23 different answers probably as we go across the state with how they feel. Some of these counties don't want any other intrusion in what they do, and others are happy to have it. So.
That's all I have.
Committee, any other questions? Senator Driscoll, turn your mute off. Unmute yourself.
I am. I was waiting for you to recognize me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question is this going to drag out the amount of time that it takes for people to get subdivision plats waiting for paperwork to come back out of the state engineer's office or hanging it up? Because I can see where it's already a pretty cumbersome process. Is this going to drag it out a whole bunch more?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll, I don't believe you're going to see a whole lot of difference. It depends on which of the three options that they choose to avail themselves to. Water distribution plan, that plat doesn't go through the Board of Control generally unless they are realigning acres that cross 40s. If they stay with the same acreage within a 40-acre quarter, they don't need to go before the Board of Control. It is a plat that is reviewed and approved just by the state engineer. If the water rights are abandoned, either through a petition for voluntary abandonment or through the process of what we call an ADWR, which is an authorization to detach water rights, that is a pretty quick and simple process in itself. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of holdup. You may see a little more than has historically been on municipalities because they haven't had to deal with any of these requirements prior. But we try to keep these things and have a goal to have those petitions processed and through the board within a year. So.
Follow up, Senator Driscoll, then we'll go to Representative Simpson.
A year is a long time on a subdivision filing. I guess to me, waiting on written deal, is there a process we could use where if they weren't used that they've pre-filed an abandonment on them and where they went and be a quicker process? Because I think you're gonna get huge kickback from people trying to do these. If it takes you a year to file on with these water rights on these, it's really gonna drag out subdivision time and costs. But is there a process they could basically file in with the deed that if the water rights aren't used, they automatically revert and it names where they go to? Is there a process we could do that?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Driscoll. Yes, essentially that ADWR process is about as quick as you can get. They can file that ADWR with our agency. It requires just a simplified map of where those water rights are. And it will be handled and approved probably at the very next Board of Control meeting, and we meet quarterly. So the longest they would have to wait is probably 3 months and to have that authorization accepted. Once that's accepted, it buys a 5-year time period to where it's assigned to somebody else or to somebody, or they hold on to it themselves, but they can use that same document as consent to move those water rights to other lands. Then we save those water rights. They don't go away. And oftentimes, like I said, these are really early water rights. And every time we get rid of one of those, we're just taking another piece out of our pie that we have against other states.
Follow up.
One more follow-up, then we'll go to Representative Simpson.
Mr. Chairman, I guess to me, it looks like we're changing what we've always done in Wyoming. And, the holder of the water rights is who has them, and I get we're trying to save them. But we're now putting a burden upon them as a landowner as they get ready to subdivide to do it. And I for one, don't think the process we're doing is helpful. It's helpful for water rights, but it certainly isn't helpful for someone that owns land or a developer that's trying to develop land to shift this burden totally over onto them. And consequently, I think this process likely is going to be an uphill battle if we use this methodology to go about it.
So I'll go to Representative Simpson, but Senator Driscoll, any ideas you have, I think would be helpful as moving forward as to how we would resolve that. But with that, Representative Simpson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak specifically about Lauren's comments about section 41-3-114, that process of notification. I know several municipalities and several irrigation districts that just simply are choking down and won't do this because of the cost of notifying every single person with a certified letter is just cost prohibitive and so burdensome. So I really like what we have drafted up in that bill. Just wanted to mention it to you. Thanks.
Any other comments, committee, question? I've got one. Go ahead, Senator Moniz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wondering if we had not solicit a little feedback from the County Commissioners Association as well. I don't know if they're aware of this or not, but I think we at least ought to get their feedback on this, see what their thoughts are. It may vary, but at least we have their feedback.
Yeah, so committee, we've got 2 potential more readings of this bill. So I think it's just a matter of if we can have Abigail contact the Wyoming County Commissioners Association and let them know that we would like their input. Only thing we can do is invite them, and if their association chooses not to come and provide input, then that's all we can do. So if we can just make a note, go ahead, Abigail. And I was going to ask Abigail if you had anything else that you wanted to add to either one of those bill drafts as the draft, or anything that we need to pay particular attention to, or anything that was left. So go ahead.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to check if you wanted me to contact the Association of Municipalities as well.
Yep.
And then as for the bill drafts, mostly I took what the SEO and the Board of Control provided, and there's a few cleanup changes in there as well, but I don't think I have anything to add unless you want to go line by line.
I don't think we're at that point that we need to go line by line at this. I think we need to get them out and get them advertised now that we've got a bill draft and people can take a look at it at our next meeting. We'll take public comment. I am going to take public comment on this. Do we have anybody waiting in the wings, Abigail, that you're aware of that wanted to comment on either one of these bill drafts?
Mr. Chairman, no, nobody submitted comment forms for these bills. The only people in the waiting room are still Greg Kerr and then state lands representatives.
Okay, I had one real quick question, and I believe it's on, let's see, 62. And let me see if I can find it now. Well, probably not. I can't find that. Well, here it is. So it's, and I don't know, Lauren, you may want to take a stab at this, but on page 3, line 10, it says a plan accompanied, and you may have already gone over this. I think you did, but I just want clarification under subsection C. The plan accompanied by a written certification from the state engineer approving the plan. So go through that process again. So the state engineer certifies the plan and then provides that to the Board of Control. Why wouldn't the plan just go straight to the Board of Control?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is the point where I was making that if they don't change the quarter, the number of acres within a quarter, they don't have to go to the Board of Control.
Okay, that's what I want to clarify.
So yeah, we wouldn't handle this under a change of use petition if they're keeping the acreage numbers the same. But we asked that on their plat, they lay out the number of acres in each lot, where the tap is, how they handle their wastewater, things like this. Where do they get their water at that for each lot? And so these plats then are a water distribution plan that can just be signed off by the state engineer in that case.
Okay, and then I've got one more question, because you alluded to the fact that if this was to pass, this gives them a 5-year time frame to be able to do some of this stuff under existing law. So what happens, what are we looking at? So how do we address all the stuff that's currently out there in limbo? This is looking forward. What's the recommendation? Is that where we go back to the Title 15, or are we going to look back?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say the 5-year window I was speaking to is if they decide to do the voluntarily abandon those water rights, we use that ADWR process, and that carries with it a 5-year time lag that where those water rights can then be moved to somewhere else. The process would be, we want to still continue looking at what we can do within the current structure of water law, the prior appropriation doctrine and all of that, to address those concerns with those water rights that are already orphaned out there that possibly have not historic use for a number of years and things like that. Every time we took a look at a different statutory edit, we'd run into problems with, keeping that tenet of water law there in place and not damaging the beneficial use measure of water rights. Because that's one of the basic tenets that we have to live under. So we want to keep looking at that issue. It's something that needs to be dealt with.
So what's the plan as far as we looking at it? So is it you're working with the AGs and then our staff attorneys? What other input? We got a working group. Do we need to have a subcommittee on this? What's your thoughts on that, Lauren?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think a subcommittee might be a good way to attack it. We have been working with our attorneys, Mr. Brown and Mr. Cassidy, over time here since the last meeting heavily. But I do think we need to start involving some others from outside and some stakeholders across the state that could bring some other ideas possibly that maybe we're missing something simple. We have run into roadblocks each time to this point.
And that's my recollection every time that we've had legislation, somebody always comes out and finds a fatal flaw with water law. This is not the first time we've gone down this road. Well, along those lines, what I'm going to do is Lauren, is to have you work with the state engineers and identify what you guys think would be appropriate stakeholders in this, and we'll form an unofficial, just an ad hoc subcommittee. And what I'm going to ask is if there's any members of the select water committee that would like to work with them on that. So Vice Chairman Larson, I'll volunteer to do that, and then would like Abigail, I'd like the participation of LSO. If you can stay in touch, and I will help coordinate that with with Lauren and then Senator Driscoll. So any other members want to be involved from Select Water in this ad hoc committee? So right now, what I'm going to ask is Lauren work with Abigail to get, you know, what you view as appropriate stakeholders involved. And then once we've done that, kind of frame up, you know, what some of those issues is, real just small briefing for the ad hoc group. And then we'll send out a survey and try to get some times to start some discussions along this lines. Does that work for everybody?
Very good.
Abigail? All right. All right. Anything else for Lauren or LSO staff on this issue on orphan water rights? All right, we're going to move on. Next item on the agenda is, if I can find the agenda, hydrologically connected surface and groundwater. Abigail, you want to walk us through your research on that today?
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I can do that. Let me pull it up here. So this is kind of a follow-up memo to the one Josh prepared for the, was it June meeting? Basically, I looked at Wyoming and then 4 other states. Maybe it's only 3. To kind of compare and contrast what they do in terms of compact as well as statutes and then any case law. So Wyoming, the issue of interconnectivity between surface and groundwater is currently kind of dealt with on a harm basis. If there's some sort of harm involved, then they'll regulate a junior water right holder. One area though where it has been specifically defined in Wyoming is the North Platte Basin. And as we were talking previously about the cap on acres, in order to come up with that, which acres in the basin are included under the cap, they took this there's a definition in the compact that's then been used to go in and create these maps, which I attached to an example of the map in the memo. Towards the end, attachment B, you'll see that. So the definition that was in the decree was the, let me find it, a hydrologically connected groundwater well is one that is so located and constructed that if it were intentionally withdrawn by the well continuously for 40 years, the cumulative stream depletion would be greater than or equal to 28% of the total groundwater withdrawn from the well. So then they took that and made the maps, and if it's a green area, the default is it's not included. However, if it's not in the green area, it's not necessarily that it is connected, but there has to be further, the default is that it is, and you can go in and look at, do an additional investigation to see if it's hydrologically connected. I then pulled up the Kansas, Nebraska, and Colorado, the Republican River Compact. And that's another compact that had recent litigation that was heavily influenced by the groundwater pumping. And there, that compact just talks about virgin water supply. And so the issue is that they had to figure out what is included in that and how are they dividing that all up. As a result of the litigation, they had to look at this cumulative computed beneficial consumptive use, which is stream flow depletion resulting from activities of man, but that included the irrigation from well pumping. And the way they chose to go about delineating those areas was through a massive groundwater model of the entire basin. And so they put in their water use data and it changes in the model. Outside of the Republican River Basin, Kansas regulates groundwater pretty much the same way as Wyoming. Nebraska is kind of your other extreme where surface water and groundwater is regulated by 2 completely separate entities. Your DNR, Department of Natural Resources, is doing the surface water, and then their local natural resource districts are regulating the groundwater. They have a process where they can kind of come up with an integrated management plan, but they have case law in Nebraska that says the NRDs are still the primary party that with jurisdiction over groundwater. Then finally, I looked at Colorado, which is kind of your other extreme in terms of they've defined everything in statute. It's probably the most complicated one. So in the last memo on kind of the last page, you got the definition of just their non-tributary groundwater. They also have defined tributary groundwater designated then they're non-tributary, and then not non-tributary. So in Colorado, they presume all groundwater to be tributary unless it falls into one of the other categories. And the tributary groundwater is defined as water in the unconsolidated alluvial aquifer of sand, gravel, and other sedimentary materials, and all other waters hydraulically connected thereto, which can influence the rate or direction or movement of the water in the alluvial aquifer natural stream. So that's their default. And then if you get into designated groundwater, you're looking at water within these designated groundwater basins. And that water, the definition they have in statute is it would not be available to or required for the fulfillment of any of their decreed surface rights, or its groundwater in areas not adjacent to continuously flowing natural stream, where the groundwater withdrawals have constituted the principal water use for at least 15 years preceding. So in these areas, if you're pumping groundwater from one of the designated basins, the presumption is that it's designated groundwater unless someone comes in and proves otherwise, which would be it is affecting, you could use it to fulfill a decreed surface right, or it is adjacent to one of these streams. So, and then the other issue with the designated groundwater is it can't be classified as designated groundwater if withdrawing that water would have more than a de minimis impact on surface water or cause injury to surface water rights. So there you're also kind of having that harm standard. Finally is the definition we talked about at the last meeting is your non-tributary groundwater. And that's water that's located outside of any of the designated basins where the withdrawal of that water will not, within 100 years of continuous withdrawal, deplete the flow of the natural stream at an annual rate greater than 1/10 of 1% of the annual rate of withdrawal. The flip side of that is the non-tributary groundwater is it's water from portions of the Denver Basin aquifers that are also outside of any designated basin, and the withdrawal of which will, within the 100 years, kind of the same standard there. So that's what I found. If you have really deep questions, you'll probably have to ask someone with a background in groundwater.
It's interesting to me that, and I believe it was Kansas, you give one example, and the presumption of making a determination. One was on it's just the opposite of what Colorado. So who has to prove what? And one was the person that was withdrawing the water would have to prove, and the other one was the person that was contesting that you would the burden of proof. In other words, in a contested issue, it seems like there's a differential between one state law and another one as to who's responsible for demonstrating that it is or isn't hydrologically connected. But while I got 3 members of the Board of Control on here, I'd like to ask a question. You know, what we're trying to get to is thread the needle that we have something statewide that's workable. Obviously, when you say you got to make a determination of a depletion over 100 years, we're talking more money and consultants than we could probably afford to do. But I would ask each one of you gentlemen your thoughts as far as looking this, because of the compacts and the decrees, on a basin by basin scenario. So I'll start with you, Brian, and then we'll go to Kevin and Lauren. So what's your thoughts of trying to make this determination, given that you've already got one on the North Platte? Does it make sense for us to try to craft something statewide around that? Or
definitely, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I definitely think that it should probably be looked at statewide. We are seeing so much groundwater in southeast Wyoming that, as Greg will allude to, we've got 2 orders under the groundwater, under the Horse Creek order and the Laramie County Control Area order, where we've got a lot of potential interference with groundwater and surface water. The Bates Creek area is another one where we've got interference also. So in my little neck of the woods, I think it's very important to be looking at that hydrologically connected groundwater.
So Brian, do you think that what would work in the North Platte would be applicable to the Colorado?
Mr. Chairman, I'd hate to speculate as to what what works in the North Platte versus what works in the Colorado. I don't know enough probably about some of the Colorado aquifers and things of this nature to say that that would be the best way to go.
Kevin, you got a follow up on that?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have a little different opinion than what Brian does on it. I deal with the River Compact, and which specifically allows us some extra depletion of groundwater. Although we're working on a depletion now on it, we think we could be somewhat close, but I would hate to tie that up with surface water and all of a sudden run on the same priority schedule. As it works now, we'd be running two different depletion schedules, one for groundwater and one for surface water. Granted, they would be connected at some point, but at this point, we don't have to deal with that under the compact. And so this compact specifically allows us to do so. But as far as the Colorado and any other basins, the Snake, I'd have to dig into that a little more and see maybe if we have some of the same issues.
Lauren, you want to take a stab at it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, sure. My water division up here, we're kind of groundwater poor. We don't have a lot of use like Division 1 down there in the North Platte. Ours is pretty much centered over on the west flank of the Bighorn Mountains. We have some pretty good producing Madison wells over there, but they're so deep that we really don't have issues with interconnectivity. The only thing we have really come across over the years is there was a play years ago where surface water diverters found that we regulated typically by what we call our tab book in the field, and groundwater rights weren't in the original front end of that tab book, and that if they would go in and dig a pit next to the creek and call it a groundwater well, then we wouldn't regulate them. And that went out many years ago. We've been regulating those the same as we do the surface water historically now for probably 20 years. So I'm going to say, a statewide solution sounds great, but I think it might want to look at either a water division solution might be a better way to attack it. Each division is going to have its own compacts to deal with and those ramifications. So in my mind, I think the best thing we could do is maybe 4 little divisions across the state on how that's handled.
Well, and what I'm envisioning actually is a more of an umbrella, and then tear that off based on divisions and compacts. And so, I know we've had testimony in the past from Chris Brown from the AG's office about moving any groundwater out of the Powder River Basin as part of the Wyoming v. Montana, a determination there that groundwater is aperturant to that basin and falls under the jurisdiction of the Yellowstone Compact. And I may be misstating that, but in previous discussions, I know there's another scenario there where it has a different consideration under the Yellowstone Compact, again, out of the Montana v. Wyoming litigation. So I think the next step is maybe what I'd like to do is myself and Vice Chair Larson work with Abigail, the AG's office and the Board of Control, and craft up a piece of draft legislation to kick around and get something started as far as on paper to look at. Maybe we can have that ready by the next meeting in November. Certainly have you guys' input and weigh in on that as much as possible. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
This is Chris Brown. Can I provide a suggestion for you?
Yeah, Chris, welcome to the meeting. Good to see you all the way in the back of the room there.
We're actually right in the middle of the room, but that screen makes it look like we're in a tunnel about a half mile away.
At least.
In listening, I'm wanting to make sure that we're trying to address the question that you're trying to get at. So in what I mean by that is what Abigail has described, for example, with regard to the Colorado process and the different things they do in the 0.1% and 100 years connection. That is really a test to determine about whether a new groundwater withdrawal or an existing groundwater withdrawal interferes with another Colorado senior surface water right. And that's what you'll find in some of the other states as well. The current kind of blanket test in Montana right now is whether or not there's any sort of interference with a senior surface water right. Then the presumption is it's connected, and whoever's applying for that groundwater appropriation then has to prove either it's not connected or they mitigate in some way. Same thing happens in Idaho. When we're talking about, and so that's the context of whether or not a new groundwater withdrawal interferes with a senior surface water right. And so those are generally going to be a statewide test because it's going to be the same everywhere. When we're talking about, for example, the 2840 rule in the North Platte Basin, that is simply a decree and a PRIP number. It only relates to Wyoming's obligations under the North Platte Decree to our acreage caps and our consumptive use caps. What groundwater are we going to include with regard to irrigated acreage from those connected wells? Has absolutely nothing to do with regard to whether or not those wells interfere with other Wyoming rights. So for, as Superintendent Pugsley pointed out, there are at least 3 separate situations in Division 1 where there are separate orders in place that have found under the existing Wyoming statute that it's a single source of supply, and that those particular groundwater wells are so connected to the surface water as to constitute a single source. And so those groundwater wells are regulated in priority with the senior surface water rights. And that's Bates Creek, and that's Horse Creek, and that's Crow Creek south of Cheyenne. And so those are completely different rules, whether or not we're complying with the North Platte Decree, or does a particular groundwater well interfere with the senior surface water rights. So as far as proposed legislation, we kind of need to know what we're shooting at as far as, and so what Superintendent Payne talked about as far as the Bear River Compact, that's a compact accounting sort of effort. It doesn't necessarily go to whether or not those particular groundwater wells are regulated in conjunction with the senior surface water right, or whether they interfere with that senior surface water right. So we kind of need to know what it is we're trying to get at.
Yeah, so thanks for that, Chris, because it really is so initially what spurred this discussion is some interest in the Colorado River Basin as far as produced water and using that as a supplemental source of supply, and whether that is tributary or non-tributary water. So in this particular case, we're not necessarily looking for an interference decision to make sure that we're not withdrawing. We just want a determination that it is or isn't hydrologically connected. So that's a whole different question versus whether there's interference. And so I really do see it. I think for that clarity, Chris, is initially that's kind of what I want to focus on. And maybe we look at the determination of interference as a secondary component. But right now, what I'd like is some kind of statutory tool that is available to the state engineer for his determination that comes back and says it either is or is not tributary water, groundwater to the surface. So I think at some point in time, how do we get there? I'm asking you a question. So how do we get there just to make that determination to say, look, it is or it isn't connected?
Well, Mr. Chairman, of course, we've only really got, or only really have one test in the state for that purpose, and that's in the North Platte. And the only way we have the 2840 test, which is really, my understanding is connected to no reality whatsoever, except for the fact that that's what everybody could agree on. The only reason that we have that test that works in the North Platte is because the United States, Colorado, Nebraska, and the state of Wyoming agreed to it. And so having a test that works in each of our basins with regard to if we want to call that compact water or not compact water, if there's no test like there is in the North Platte Decree, then I think that's something that we're certainly going to have to consider discussing with our neighboring states.
Well, thanks for muddying the water, Chris. I appreciate it.
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, I don't know that we're any further than when we started down this rat hole. Well, I don't have any suggestions at the time right now. So what I would say is let's think about this a little bit. Anybody has an epiphany in the near future? But I think in the meantime, I think we'll keep plugging along here and maybe just throw some stuff out there to continue the discussion. I want to take a look at that 2840 test. Again, that may be where we end up is we've got to come up with a proposal, and then with these compact basin states, particularly Colorado, that would probably go to the UCRC, the Upper Colorado River Commission, to make a determination or a discussion as to whether the other states were interested in that. How would that play, Chris, given Colorado's already got a statutory requirement in Colorado? Or that?
Mr. Chairman, it's not always easy to predict. I do want to give you some light at the end of the tunnel with regard to this question, at least with regard to the Colorado River Basin. Of course, that basin is faced now with its 20th year of drought, and everybody in that basin, and there's more than just a few people in that basin, in addition to the folks in Wyoming, have done a lot of work to try to identify augmentation, try to identify additional sources of water. And so they're looking at all kinds of things with regard to that. And one of the things that they have already taken a look at is this idea of CBM produced water. And at least in some initial looks at it, haven't identified significant concerns with regard to its nature as being tributary to the Colorado River. Of course, the definition of the Colorado River within the 1922 compact says the Colorado River and all of its tributaries. We had that same exact argument in front of the United States Supreme Court under the Yellowstone River Compact. And in that case, the court found, as they did in the Republican River Compact, that tributaries includes groundwater that's tributary to the river. My only point is that the states in the Colorado River Basin have looked at that as a potential source of augmentation, and it's not dead. They're still considering it. I think the primary concern, if I recall correctly, and I can share a study with you, was that there simply wasn't enough to make a big difference. So the economics, I think, played into it to a certain degree. Steve Wolf might remember more than I do. But I think we often say in the Colorado River Basin, if we stay within the framework of the law of the river, the law is basically what the 7 states say it is. So if all 7 states agreed that a certain level of groundwater wasn't connected enough to be considered tributary, then I think we're there. How we get there is to advance the conversation with our sister states. UCRC would be a good place to start in the upper basin.
All right, well, we'll give this some thought and see where we go from there. I'm aware of a study that USGS did with one of the companies over here where they were actually looking at isotope analysis and being able to make a determination on the age of the water. And some of the water we're talking about, the recharge is 2,000 years plus. And so I think maybe we look at bringing in some of the discussions from the scientific technical side of this, meaning the geology, and if there's an isotope analysis that you can trace back through, and I don't know how they did the isotope analysis, but due to the rate of decay, they could age the water that was coming out of these deep geologic formations. So, but I think it's room for discussion as we move forward. But right now, I don't have any direction for staff other than, or anybody else on this as other than maybe thoughts. If you've got something, shoot myself and Abigail an email on that, and we'll see if it pops up on the next agenda or not. with that, unless there's any public comment on this issue or any other questions, I want to keep moving down through the agenda. So any other discussion or questions, committee? All right, next item on the agenda. I'm trying to get my agenda. I keep minimizing and maximizing. And so where are we at, Abigail?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we're up, state lands is up next. Let me check.
Yeah, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So who do we have with the Office of State Lands and Investment that's going to walk us through this?
I'm moving it.
There we go. Okay, I think we're ready now. All right, there we are. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Jennifer Scoggin, the Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments. With me today, I have Amanda Sewell. She's our Assistant Director for the Financial Services Division. And I have Beth Blackwell. She's our Grants and Contracts Administrator. So if you prefer, we'll just launch on into it.
Get with the program, Director.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So we were asked to provide the committee with an update on the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So before we launch into the Wyoming specifics, I'm just going to do kind of a high-level overview of the ground rules, if you will, to refresh everybody's recollection. So the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund was established by Congress under the 1996 amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act. The fund provides affordable financing to public water systems to help fund drinking water infrastructure improvement projects. Additionally, set-asides of the grants are allowed to the states to support water systems with non-infrastructure needs. The main objective is to facilitate compliance with the national primary drinking water regulations or to otherwise significantly advance the public health objectives of the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is a federal-state partnership program. The federal government provides the capitalization grants to the states, and the states must provide a 20% match. In Wyoming, the 20% match is split evenly between OSLI and the Water Development Office. In Wyoming, the State Loan and Investment Board is the recipient of the federal capitalization grants. And as the administrative arm for SLIB, or the staff, we have financial responsibilities related to applying for and expending the funds, financial review of the loan application, review of loan disbursements, and reporting to the EPA on our activities. Our sister agencies, DEQ and Water Development, also have responsibilities under the program. Water Development is responsible for the technical analysis related to the application and the project, and DEQ is responsible for capacity development and environmental review during the loan application process. So now that I've set the stage, I'm going to yield the floor to Beth Blackwell. She's going to provide sort of an overview of Wyoming's fund at this time and give an example of some of the more recent funding applications that we've received and give you some other details about the types of projects and the terms of the loan. So Beth?
Absolutely. We provided a handout to you. Within that handout are some statistics. Currently, we have 4 loans that are pending closing. So that means those loans, the loan documents have been sent to the entity. We're waiting for loan documents to be executed so that we can send the money out and they can start their project. We currently have 30 loans dispersing. So 30 projects are in the process currently. 140 loans are in repayment, totaling 94, almost $95 million. And then we have 72 loans or projects that have been completed, totaling 69 million, over 69 million. In addition to that, we have 8 conditionally approved loans at this time. So those loans have been presented to SLIB for approval. However, staff is currently completing a financial analysis and determining whether they can afford the loan, as well as technical staff is working through the environmental and the capacity development portion of the grant application. We have 3 loans that will be going in October. Right now, the average size of a loan that is awarded through the drinking water program is $1,122,403. Our largest loan to date is $5,717,000. And the current terms of any loans, all of our loans currently have a 2.5% interest rate unless they have a green component. Green component would be energy efficiency, water conservation, those type of things. A loan can come with a combined interest rate between the 2.5 and the green component, which comes at 0%. The length of a loan can be up to 20 years for an entity that's not considered disadvantaged. However, if they are considered disadvantaged, they can amortize their loan up to 30 years. There is no prepayment penalty currently with our loans, and there's a 1% origination fee. We use principal forgiveness with our loans when it's available. However, after October's meeting, there will be no principal forgiveness available in the drinking water program. Generally,
What's the current amount left in the fund right now?
Currently, we have $1,226,749,509 available to loan from the fund. The majority of the projects that we fund from this program are meter projects, which a lot of times those are considered green projects if we're installing meters where there haven't been meters before. Wells, and I think the majority of our projects are replacing old deteriorated water lines. Those are the main three that we see project-wise through this program.
Thanks, Beth. So in Wyoming, we have several challenges with respect to full utilization of the drinking water capitalization grants. Our state matching funds, at least on the OSLI side, it can be difficult to budget for these given that state revenues are down and we're dealing with budget cuts and that sort of thing. But perhaps the biggest obstacle in Wyoming is our small population. Approximately 1/3 of Wyoming's population utilizes individual wells and septic systems. And so that leaves a limited number of people who may be available to avail themselves of these funds, because as I mentioned, they are to fund public water systems. In Wyoming, 83% of active Wyoming water systems serve populations of less than 500 people. And so only 1% serve populations greater than 10,000. So we have some challenges to actually get this money out the door. Another challenge that we face is competition with other funding opportunities in Wyoming, such as mineral royalty grant program. As you might imagine, most applicants would rather have a grant than a loan because you got to pay back a loan. However, MRG funds are dwindling and we are not probably going to have as much money available moving forward. So we're hoping to steer some of these types of applicants to the drinking water SRF fund moving forward with some incentives that Beth will talk about at the end of our presentation. Further, some of our applicants are just unwilling to be proactive with rates or to raise rates, which would make a requested loan under the program more affordable. And we find too that there can be some lack of planning with communities. They don't have capital improvement plans or asset management plans. They're relying on consultants to tell them what to do and when to do it. So what's the future of the fund in Wyoming? Well, we have recently been working with EPA, with Region 8, with DEQ and the Water Development Office to brainstorm new ways to get these funds out. Region 8 does understand our difficulties with our small population, and they have provided some suggestions, mainly with set-asides and use of set-asides. We recently learned that EPA will allow Wyoming to even take partial capitalization grants, which might be helpful with some of the revenue challenges we're seeing. We have a meeting with DEQ next week to explore partial grants through the program. And that combined with utilizing more of the available set-asides can help us make the best use of these available funds. And additionally, OSLI has presented some suggestions to the SLIB with respect to how to get more interest in the drinking water program. So Beth, would you please explain some of those?
Sure. The first option that we presented to SLIB was the idea of a tiered interest rate when we don't have any principal forgiveness available. What we have found is when principal forgiveness is not available, the utilization of the program is decreased substantially. So what we're recommending for times such as what we're heading into when we don't have principal forgiveness available is we would offer them a cut in their interest rate. So rather than the regular 2.5% interest rate for an entity that would have otherwise qualified for 75% interest or 75% principal forgiveness, they would receive an interest rate of 75 basis points, so less than 1%. Entities that would have been qualified for a 50% principal forgiveness would have an interest rate of 1%. And those that qualified for 25% would have an interest rate of 1.25%. And any entity such as our large communities, Cheyenne, Casper, Gillette, who aren't eligible for principal forgiveness, they don't meet the eligibility requirements, they would be eligible for an interest rate of 1.75%. This would help hopefully entice people to come use our program even when there's not principal forgiveness available, because this would still make their projects more affordable. One of the other ideas that we presented was having a large loan category. So those projects that are very large that generally bond to finance, maybe enticing them to come to the SRF program. So for loans that are between 5 million and 7.5 million, we would offer an interest rate of 1.5. Loans up to 10 million would have an interest rate of 1%, and loans greater than 10 million would have an interest rate of 5%. So those very large projects would save 2% interest coming to us and using this structure. Those are the big changes that we're proposing to the program to help entice, hopefully, interest in it and to get people to come use the program.
Right. So at this point, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, as we mentioned, we've been in dialogue with the SLIB on some of our ideas to help garner more interest in the program. We're supposed to be discussing it further at our October meeting and getting some further direction from them. But just so you're aware, OSLI, we're doing everything that we can to ensure the continued success of the drinking water SRF program in Wyoming. And so with that, we would stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, committee?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Representative Blake.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, the 246 loans, is that from the inception of the program to today's date?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blake, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
What's the maximum loan forgiveness that you can go up to on these SRF grants?
Mr. Chairman, it is 75%, and the percentage is based on 3 categories: their unemployment rate compared to the states, their population, as well as their average median household income compared to the states. So that is essentially was dictated by EPA and the Clean Water Program, and since we manage both, we like to keep them kind of in compliance with one another, hand in hand.
And another question, do we have within our database the ability to go in there, so where there wasn't full loan forgiveness, what other state programs these entities tapped into, aka MRG grants through SLIB or Wyoming Water Development Programs? I think going forward, one of the things we're going to see is trying to shift more of this burden over onto SRF, but I'm trying to get a feel for what we've been doing as far as MRGs and water development to match up with the SRF component of that, and see if there's some way moving forward that we can shift more over onto because of the cost share rate with the feds to do that. But do you have any idea off the top of your head what has been current, and what about RUS? How do they play into this scenario too?
I would say at least 50%, if not more, of the loans we've closed have some other funding component, whether it be MRG or a lot of them are water development. I would say about 5 years ago, we really pushed for applicants to, there was a conversation between OSLI and the Water Development Office to, instead of funding the 33% loan portion of the projects, those were being sent over to SRF. Some of those we were able to fund, some we weren't able to fund due to the fact that the entities weren't able to afford the loan portion. So I would say a good portion of the loans that we close have another component to it that generally is a grant component, because as the director stated, the majority of our water systems have such small populations, they can't generate the revenue to pay for these projects, because regardless of how big or small they are, they're expensive projects. And so I think more often than not, you do have that match part. On the part with USDA, I would say our entities struggle with that funding portion because their requirements are very demanding upfront. You have to have that the preliminary engineering report, which they have to front the money for. It's a difficult process. It's not near as easy as, say, getting an MRG or going through you all to get a grant. So I would say we see less funding that's joint with USDA. However, we can do it, and we have done it. I don't think really there's anybody as in another funding source that we can't play in the sandbox with.
And I guess that leads me to the question, this would be for you, Director Scoggins. 2 years, the governor come and ask for an additional position in your office to actually help some of these smaller public entities be able to navigate all of this, with the idea that we were going to help them fill out the USDA RUS applications and drinking water and try to wean them off of the state funds. So how is that working in your office? And have we been successful in being able to shift some of that burden over with that position?
Mr. Chairman, we brought our engineer on in October, so we were a little bit late getting off the ground due to all the, I don't know what, all the administrative process to get the position, to advertise the position and get somebody on board. He has been working, the governor had asked us to put together sort of a survey and a database, if you will, of some of the infrastructure in Wyoming, particularly where we would know that there might be needs, so that we could help sort of anticipate and predict some of these projects that might be coming forward. So he's been instrumental in working on that sort of thing. We get him up and running, and then we hit COVID. So we had plans for him to be out in the community meeting people. He talks to communities almost every day, fielding different engineering questions and that sort of thing. He's been kind of redirected to help out with CARES Act funding right now. He's been very much in charge of organizing that and dealing with some, or reviewing some of the capital construction requests through CARES Act. We also have him working closely with the city of Cheyenne on the 26th Street Interceptor project. So, Mr. Chairman, we're getting there. We have plans for him to go out into the communities, but he is starting to make those contacts with the smaller communities to be able to provide the assistance that you were envisioning.
So is, Director, is he interfacing with water development to see where those applicants are and making contact with them? And early on, so when the planning studies come in with water development for some municipality of 400 people, it was always envisioned that this guy would be Johnny on the spot, or this position would be, they'll apply to water development, but we certainly want to capture them at that point and make sure that we've got somebody working with them, whether it's RUS, SRF, MRGs, whatever the program is that we want to put together the least cost alternative package to the state and the sponsor. So are we doing that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer that question to Beth. Beth is his supervisor, so go ahead.
Honestly, Keenan has reviewed, I believe, the last 5 years of all the plans and studies that were completed through Water Development and the Water Development Commission, and that's where he started his database. And so I don't believe, since he's been on with us since October, that any new studies have come out and people have reached out to ask him for help. However, we have had several meetings with the Water Development Office and how he can work with them, and we can utilize the GIS information that they have and the information that they already have and kind of mix our resources and make the best of the situation. How do we use him and get the best product? So we're trying to use what resources we have available currently to identify maybe a plan of attack of how do we go about and who do we focus on. When he did come on, I did send out a mass email to let everybody know that he was here. He's available to help. But I think everyone's dealing with COVID right now and just trying to keep their head above water, to be quite honest with you.
Mr. Chairman, perhaps you raise a good point. We probably need to put some more precise procedures in place to make sure that we are properly utilizing him for the task for which you envisioned.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to make sure that you know, and I understand pretty well where we're at with not only just COVID, but the other fiscal component of this thing. But we need to show progress with this, and I'm hoping that we're not waiting for people to come to him. I want this to be a headhunter position, that he's out the minute that there's an application and with anybody, DEQ, Water Development, and it looks like this would be a perfect fit for this position, that he's out working with them. That's always part of the problem now that we're dealing with, is people revert to what they know, and if they don't know we've created this position, they're not going to come and ask. So
you raise a good point, Mr. Chairman, and we will definitely sit down and make sure that we are doing those interactions with DEQ and with Water Development and making sure that he is taking on the tasks that you're envisioning.
Yeah, thank you, Director. I think it's important if we're going to justify the position going forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right. Committee, any more questions for the Director or the office regarding the update here? I don't see any hands. All right, thank you for the update. We appreciate it, and keep us informed. We'll see you, at least I will, at the JAC meeting sometime in the near future. So look forward for an update at that point in time. Abigail, any other business that we need to take care of today?
Mr. Chairman, I think that was it for your agenda. I guess maybe for the committee's benefit, Senator Barrasso's office is available in November. So that was an item we had talked about having on the agenda for this month.
And so just remind everybody why we'd asked Senator Barrasso's office to give us an update.
It was to come talk about the Water Infrastructure Act that he's sponsoring, and it should be getting going in Congress by then. Right now, most of their work is going towards COVID as well.
Yeah. And the committee, the importance of that is that comes through Senator Barrasso's EPW committee, and there's some significant language in there that would pay huge dividends to the state of Wyoming. I think it's up to $80 million a year available to states with less than a population of 1 million for water-related storage and infrastructure projects. So 80-20 cost share on that. So feds would pick up 80%. So there's only 5 states that have a population of 1 million or less. So it could be a huge benefit to the state of Wyoming, and particularly water development, if that would move forward as part of the infrastructure bill. So hopefully we get an update, and that's moving by the time we get to November. Abigail, anything else we need to go over at this time? committee members, anything good of the committee? Anybody want to bring anything up? All right, I guess with that, then the Select Water Committee meeting is adjourned at this time. And I turn it back over to Water Development. Any closing comments or anything we need to do before tomorrow or no on for the agenda tomorrow?
I don't know of anything, Senator Hicks. I'm looking around the room. Most of the eyes are closed. No, they're not. They're out and going.
Mr. Chairman, I see the director running out the back door. What's all that about?
He feels great relief from having this meeting to where it's at.
All right, I guess we're adjourned. And if you guys are adjourned, we'll see you in the morning at 8:30, correct?
Yep.
Yes.
All right, thank you.